June 6, 1944, as American boys stormed Normandy's blood-soaked beaches, the German panzers that could have slaughtered them sat idle. 50 miles away? Why? Because Adolf Hitler himself had been fooled by a chicken farmer from Spain who'd never fired a shot in his life. His name was Juan Pujol García. No formal training, no government connections. Just an ordinary man with an extraordinary gift for lying. While the world's armies clashed in the greatest war in history, this quiet Spaniard built an imaginary spy network of 27 fictional agents, fed the Nazis thousands of pages of manufactured intelligence, and single-handedly convinced Hitler's high command that the D-Day invasion would strike somewhere it wouldn't. The Germans trusted him so completely that they awarded him the Iron Cross. The British valued him so highly that King George VI gave him the Member of the Order of the British Empire. He's the only person in history to receive high honors from both sides in World War II. His code name was Garbo, and his lies saved tens of thousands of Allied lives. This is the documented, declassified story of the greatest double agent who ever lived, the man who turned deception into an art form and used it to defeat the Third Reich. If you're interested in incredible true stories from World War II, untold heroes, and the secret operations that changed history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We bring you documented historical accounts that read like spy thrillers because they actually happened. Let me take you back to 1941, to a modest hotel in Lisbon where one man decided to take on Nazi Germany armed with nothing but his imagination. Juan Pujol García was born in Barcelona in 1912, into a Spain that would soon tear itself apart. He grew up in a middle-class family with liberal values, the kind of household that believed in democracy, human dignity, and rational thought. These weren't just abstract principles for young Juan. They were the foundation of who he was. When the Spanish Civil War erupted in 1936, Pujol found himself caught in the middle of a nightmare. This wasn't a war between good and evil. This was a war between two kinds of evil, and he wanted nothing to do with either side. But in a civil war, neutrality isn't an option. Pujol was conscripted, forced to fight. And here's where his character reveals itself. He managed to serve on both sides of that brutal conflict without ever firing his weapon at another human being. Not once. He found ways to avoid combat, to stay alive, to survive without taking a life. Think about that for a moment. In the chaos and violence of the Spanish Civil War, where neighbor turned against neighbor, where ideology trumped humanity, this young man held on to his principles. He refused to kill for either the fascists or the communists. By the time the war ended in 1939, Pujol had developed what he later called a deep loathing of totalitarianism in every form. He'd seen what happens when men with absolute certainty gain absolute power. He'd watched the fascists crush dissent with brutal efficiency. He'd witnessed the communists execute their enemies with cold ideology. And he was disgusted by all of it. Then came September 1939. Nazi Germany invaded Poland. World War II had begun. From neutral Spain, Pujol watched as Hitler's armies rolled across Europe. Poland fell in weeks. Denmark and Norway collapsed. France, the great military power of Europe, surrendered in just 6 weeks. By the summer of 1940, Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine. and Juan Pujol García, a 30-year-old chicken farmer and former hotel manager, decided he had to do something about it. Years later, he would write about his motivations. He said his humanist convictions would not allow him to turn a blind eye to the enormous suffering unleashed by what he called this psychopath, meaning Adolf Hitler. This wasn't about patriotism. Spain wasn't even in the war. This was about a moral conviction that someone had to stand against the tide of fascism, even if that someone was completely ordinary, completely unqualified, and completely alone. So in early 1941, Pujol walked into the British Embassy in Madrid with an audacious proposal. He wanted to become a spy for Britain. He wanted to infiltrate German intelligence and feed them false information. He had no training, no experience, no credentials, just determination and a plan. The British looked at this Spanish civilian and politely showed him the door. He tried again, and again they refused. He tried a third time, this time in Portugal. Same answer. The British simply weren't interested in an untrained Spanish volunteer with wild ideas about espionage. Put yourself in Pujol's shoes for a moment. You've decided to risk your life to fight fascism. You've developed a plan. You're offering your services for free. And the people you're trying to help keep saying no. Most people would have given up. Most people would have said, well, I tried, and gone back to their normal life. Juan Pujol Garcia was not most people. If the British wouldn't help him become a spy, he'd do it himself. He would approach the Germans, convince them to recruit him, and then betray them to the Allies. He would become a double agent without anyone's permission, without any training, without any support network. It was insane. It was brilliant. And somehow, against all odds, he pulled it off. In 1941. Pujol made contact with German intelligence in Madrid. He presented himself as a fanatical pro-Nazi Spanish official who wanted to help the Third Reich. He had to become an actor, to inhabit this character so completely that trained intelligence officers would believe him. The meeting took place in a Madrid cafe. A German agent named Friedrich Naprete sat across from him, studying him with cold, professional eyes. This man's job was to identify frauds and turn away time wasters. He'd been trained to detect lies, and Pujol lied to him beautifully. He gushed about Hitler and the New Order. He invented influential friends in London. He portrayed himself as a passionate believer in fascism, which was the exact opposite of everything he actually believed. Every word was performance, every gesture calculated. The German wasn't immediately convinced, but he was intrigued. They met again. This time, Pujol showed his new passport, proof that he could travel to Britain. He'd obtained this passport through an elaborate scheme involving smuggled Scotch whiskey and connections to pro-Franco aristocrats. The man had hustled. The Germans decided to take a chance. They gave Pujol a crash course in espionage, handed him £600 in cash, provided him with invisible ink and a code book, and sent him off to England with instructions to build a spy network for the Reich. They codenamed him Arabelle. To them, he was an answered prayer, a willing Spanish agent who could operate freely in Britain. What they didn't know was that Juan Pujol Garcia had absolutely no intention of ever setting foot in England. Not yet, anyway. Asterisk, instead of going to Britain, Pujol went to Lisbon, Portugal. Neutral territory. Safe from German supervision. a city full of spies, refugees, and information. And from this base, over 1,000 miles from London, he began to create an imaginary England. Think about the audacity of this. He'd convinced the Germans he was their man in Britain, but he'd never been there. He didn't know the streets, the culture, the way people lived. He had to fake all of it based on whatever research materials he could find. So he went to the Lisbon Public Library and checked out tourist guidebooks to Britain. He bought a blue guide, the kind of book that tourists use to find hotels and restaurants. He studied British magazines and newspapers. He watched newsreels at the cinema, paying attention to background details, street signs, anything that might help him sound authentic. From these scraps of information, he began writing intelligence reports, as if he were an agent on the ground in Britain. His first reports went out in March 1941. They were filled with observations about British life, troop movements, dockyard activities, all completely fictional, but he salted them with just enough real details gleaned from newspapers and guidebooks to make them seem credible. To make his cover story more elaborate, he created an entire network of subagents. He told the Germans he was recruiting other spies across Britain. There was a Dutch airline pilot, a Swiss businessman in Liverpool, a Venezuelan student in Glasgow, a Gibraltarian waiter, even a Welsh fascist who led something called the Brothers of the Aryan World Order. None of these people existed. They were all characters in Pujol's imagination, each with their own personality, their own backstory, their own area of expertise. By 1944, he would invent 27 fictional agents, 27 distinct characters, each filing reports, each requiring payment, each needing management. It was like running a theater company where he played every role. The Germans ate it up. Here was an agent who wasn't just providing intelligence. He was building them an entire spy network in Britain. The reports kept coming, hundreds of pages, thousands of words, all written by one man sitting in a Lisbon hotel room with a guidebook and his imagination. But here's the thing about lying on this scale. Mistakes are inevitable. In one report, Pujol mentioned that his Glasgow agent could easily get cooperation from locals because they would do anything for a liter of wine. Sounds reasonable, right? Except Scots don't drink wine by the liter, and Britain used pints, not liters. Any German intelligence analyst who actually knew Britain would have caught that immediately. Fortunately for Pujol, his German handlers didn't know Britain any better than he did. They missed the mistake entirely. Still, these close calls taught him to be more careful. He started inventing excuses for information gaps. When he couldn't provide details about a major naval movement from Liverpool, he reported that his Liverpool agent had suddenly fallen ill. Perfect excuse. Can't blame the network if an agent gets sick. Then, to make it really convincing, he announced that the Liverpool agent had died. And he actually managed to get a fake obituary published in a local British newspaper, which German intelligence saw. The Germans were so impressed by his thoroughness that they agreed to pay a pension to the agent's widow. A widow who didn't exist? For an agent who'd never lived, in a spy network that was entirely fictional, the whole operation should have collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. But it didn't, because Pujol had something the Germans desperately needed: volume and detail. He flooded them with information, and in that flood they saw value even where there was none. But quantity alone wasn't enough. Eventually, he'd need to provide something real, something verifiable, to cement his credibility. That moment came by accident. In one report, Pujol mentioned a convoy of Allied ships leaving Liverpool for Malta. He made it up completely, but by sheer coincidence, a similar convoy actually departed around that time. British codebreakers, MONITORING, German communications, intercepted messages about this convoy. Someone in German intelligence had learned about it. MI5 launched a frantic search for the leak. Convinced there was a German spy operating in Britain, they had no idea that the spy was actually a Spanish chicken farmer sitting in Portugal, making things up as he went along, but this lucky guess had an unintended consequence. It proved to both sides that Agent Arabelle was the real deal. The Germans thought their spy had genuine access. The British thought they had a serious security breach. Pujol sent another report, this one warning of a massive Allied armada departing from Wales. No such fleet existed, but the Germans took no chances. They scrambled U-boats and Luftwaffe aircraft to find this phantom convoy, wasting fuel and resources on a wild goose chase. This was exactly what Pujol wanted. His lies weren't just fooling the enemy, they were actively hurting them, making them waste time and resources chasing ghosts. By early 1942, British intelligence had collected enough intercepted German communications to realize something remarkable. There was a mysterious agent code-named Arabelle who was sending reports from Lisbon, claiming to be in Britain, and the Germans believed him. And then someone at MI5 made the connection. This had to be the same Spanish volunteer who tried to offer his services a year earlier. The man they'd turned away 3 times. In April 1942, British intelligence quietly reached out to Pujol through back channels. They smuggled him out of Portugal and brought him to England. After more than a year of working alone, without support, without training, Juan Pujol García finally had what he'd wanted all along, the backing of British intelligence. When he arrived in London, MI5 officers questioned him extensively. They had to be certain he was genuine, that this wasn't an elaborate German trap. But Pujol's sincerity shone through. He wasn't doing this for money or glory. He was doing it because he believed it was right. They gave him a new code name, one that honored his extraordinary ability to deceive. They called him Garbo, after the famous actress, Greta Garbo, because he was, in their words, the best actor in the world. Juan Pujol García, the man Britain had rejected 3 times, was now one of their most valuable intelligence assets. The amateur was about to become a professional, and the real deception was only beginning. *Me5 paired Garbo with a case officer named Thomas Harris, a young Spanish-speaking officer who understood the intricacies of deception operations. The partnership was immediate and perfect. Both men were creative, detail-oriented, and absolutely committed to defeating the Nazis. Together, they took Pujol's amateur operation and professionalized it. The fictional spy network that Pujol had created in Lisbon now had the full resources of British intelligence behind it. They could make the lies more sophisticated, more believable, more damaging to the enemy. They expanded the network of imaginary agents. Each one was carefully crafted with a complete backstory. There was a love-struck Welsh nationalist, the disgruntled American soldier stationed in Britain, the well-placed official in the British Ministry of Information. Each character had motivations, weaknesses, strengths. Pujol and Harris would spend hours developing these personalities, writing them into existence like novelists, creating a cast of characters. They kept detailed notebooks tracking each agent's life, where they lived, what they did, who they knew. When the Germans asked for intelligence from a specific region, Garbo's network always had someone who could provide it. Need information about Scotland? The Glasgow agent has something. Curious about naval movements? The Liverpool contact is on it. Wondering about American troop deployments? The disaffected American soldier has details. The Germans were getting exactly what they wanted. Comprehensive intelligence coverage of Britain from multiple, supposedly independent sources. What they were actually getting was a carefully orchestrated symphony of lies, all conducted by two men in a London office. By 1943, Pujol and Harris were writing an average of 2,000 words per letter to the Germans, sending these reports through a postbox in neutral Lisbon that the Abwehr had provided. They wrote 315 of these letters. That's over 600,000 words of fictional intelligence. To put that in perspective, that's longer than the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, except Tolkien's fantasy was published as fiction. Pujol and Harris's fantasy was being read as fact by German intelligence. But here's the genius of their approach. The reports weren't entirely false. They contained three types of information, carefully blended together. First, complete fiction, imaginary troop movements, fabricated plans, invented personalities. Second, genuine information of little or no military value, things the Germans could verify, which built credibility, but which didn't actually help them. Third, valuable intelligence that was artificially delayed, real information that arrived too late to be useful. This third category was crucial. In late 1942, during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, Garbo's network reported seeing troop ships gathering in Scotland, painted in Mediterranean camouflage. This was true. Those ships were heading to North Africa. But MI5 timed the letter so it arrived just after the invasion had already begun. To the Germans, it looked like their agent had tried to warn them, but the mail was slow. Garbo received a message from his handlers. "We are sorry they arrived too late, but your last reports were magnificent." This pattern became standard practice. Give them truth when it no longer matters. Build credibility without compromising operations. And it worked spectacularly. By mid-1943, German intelligence trusted Garbo's network so completely that they stopped trying to recruit other spies in Britain. They didn't need any. They had Garbo and his 27 sub-agents providing comprehensive coverage. The Germans were so overwhelmed with reports from Garbo that they concluded no further agents were necessary. They'd shut down their entire British spy recruitment operation because one source was already giving them everything. From Berlin's perspective, they'd won the intelligence war in Britain. They had a massive spy network feeding them detailed information about Allied plans and capabilities. Every week brought new reports, new insights, new warnings. In reality, they had nothing. Every piece of intelligence was either useless, outdated, or outright false. but the volume and detail made it seem valuable. In mid-1943, the Germans asked Garbo to start using radio transmission instead of letters. Faster communication meant more timely intelligence. MI5 agreed. Seeing an opportunity, Garbo recruited a radio operator, another fictional character, and began transmitting encrypted messages to German receivers. The Germans provided him with their latest cipher systems and one-time pads to ensure secure communications. What the Germans didn't realize was that this gift was actually helping the Allies. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park now had both the original plaintext of Garbo's messages and the encrypted versions the Germans received. This comparative data helped them crack German codes more effectively. So, Garbo's deception wasn't just misleading the enemy. It was actively contributing to Allied signals intelligence. The spy network that didn't exist was helping decrypt real German military communications. By late 1943, Juan Pujol García, Agent Garbo, had become one of Germany's most trusted intelligence sources and simultaneously one of Britain's most powerful weapons. The Germans believed they had a comprehensive understanding of British capabilities and intentions. They were making strategic decisions based on Garbo's intelligence, and that's exactly what the Allies wanted. Because in January 1944, when German intelligence sent Garbo urgent questions about Allied invasion plans, everything had been leading to this moment. The greatest deception in military history was about to begin, and Garbo would be at the center of it. By early 1944, everyone knew the Allies would invade Western Europe. The question wasn't if, but when and where. The Allies had chosen Normandy as their landing site. But if the Germans knew this in advance, if they could concentrate their forces at the right beaches, the invasion could turn into a bloodbath. Allied planners estimated that without deception, casualties could be catastrophic. So they created Operation Fortitude, the most elaborate military deception ever conceived. Its goal was simple: make the Germans believe the invasion would hit somewhere other than Normandy. The operation had two parts. Fortitude North suggested a threat to Norway, keeping German forces tied up in Scandinavia. But the main effort was Fortitude South, designed to convince Hitler that the primary invasion would strike Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. Pas de Calais made perfect sense as an invasion target. It was close to England, offered the shortest crossing, and provided the most direct route to Germany. Hitler and many of his generals expected the invasion there. So the Allies decided to feed that expectation. They created an entire phantom army. The first U.S. Army Group, Foos Egg, was positioned in southeastern England, supposedly preparing to invade Calais. On paper, it was massive, divisions of tanks, infantry, artillery, all under the command of General George Patton, one of America's most aggressive commanders. In reality, Foos didn't exist. The Allies deployed inflatable tanks and dummy aircraft in fields where German reconnaissance might spot them. They positioned fake landing craft in harbors. They created false radio traffic, with operators transmitting endless fictional communications between units that weren't there. They even had King George VI photographed inspecting these phantom forces. Newspapers ran stories complaining about overcrowding from troops in southeastern England. Every detail was designed to create the illusion of a massive invasion force aimed at Calais, but visual deceptions and radio traffic could only do so much. What the Allies really needed was a trusted voice inside German intelligence confirming the illusion. They needed Garbo. Throughout spring 1944, Garbo's network sent a steady stream of reports. His fictional agents observed vast military concentrations in southern England, all oriented toward Dover and Calais. They noted American troops and landing craft in Kent. They reported bomber squadrons massing in Scotland. Every piece of intelligence pointed to the same conclusion. The main invasion would hit Pas de Calais, with a possible secondary operation against Norway. The Germans were drowning in confirmations of their suspicions. By May 1944, German High Command was thoroughly confused. Field Marshal Rommel, defending France's coastline, was convinced a major force was assembled in southeastern England, ready to launch at Calais. But the Allies had a problem. For the deception to work past D-Day, Garbo had to maintain his credibility even after the invasion began. If he was completely wrong about the invasion, the Germans might stop trusting him. And they needed the Germans to keep trusting him for the deception to continue after the landings. So, British intelligence crafted a daring plan. Garbo would actually warn the Germans about the invasion, but in a way that wouldn't compromise Allied operations. On the night of June 5, 1944, Garbo sent word to his German handlers to be ready for an urgent transmission at 3 a.m. London time. He had critical intelligence to report at 3 in the morning on June 6th. Just hours before Allied troops would hit the beaches, Garbo transmitted his message. He warned that the invasion was coming, that he'd seen troops boarding landing craft, that soldiers were being issued vomit bags for the Channel crossing, that it was all true. It was the biggest secret of the war being given to the enemy, but there was no answer on the German side. The radio operator on duty had missed the scheduled call. Garbo tried repeatedly. Nothing. He couldn't raise his handler until around 8 in the morning. By then, American and British soldiers were already dying on Normandy's beaches. Now Garbo did something brilliant. When he finally made contact, he sent the message again, along with additional details that were now obvious since the invasion was underway. But instead of apologizing, he went on the attack. He berated his German contacts for their incompetence. "I cannot accept excuses or negligence," he transmitted. "Were it not for my ideals, I would abandon the work." Think about the psychology of this. Instead of the Germans being suspicious that he'd failed to provide timely warning, Garbo made them feel guilty for failing to receive his warning. He flipped the situation completely, and the Germans bought it. They apologized profusely. They realized they'd had an agent who tried to warn them of the invasion, who had the access and dedication to get the intelligence, and they'd dropped the ball. Garbo's credibility actually increased because of the missed message, but the real test was still coming. Over the next 48 hours, as Allied forces fought desperately to establish a foothold in Normandy, German High Command had a critical decision to make. Was Normandy the real invasion, or was it a diversion? On June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, Garbo sent what would become the most important message of his career. He reported that he'd convened an emergency meeting of his top sub-agents. Their analysis was unanimous. Normandy was a feint. The real invasion, the knockout blow, would come at Pas de Calais. The evidence was clear. Massive Allied formations, including the 1st U.S. Army Group under Patton, were still in southeastern England, untouched. They hadn't participated in the Normandy landings at all. Therefore, Garbo concluded Normandy was designed to draw German forces away from Calais. Once the Germans were committed to Normandy, the real invasion would strike where they were weak. This message was immediately forwarded to Berlin. It was placed on Adolf Hitler's desk. And Hitler believed it. That same day, Hitler ordered panzer divisions that were moving toward Normandy to halt. They were redirected to defend Calais instead. 9 elite armored divisions that could have crushed the Normandy beachhead were held in reserve, waiting for an invasion that would never come. 2 entire panzer divisions and 19 infantry divisions stayed in Pas-de-Calais through the end of June. In fact, there were more German troops in Calais at the end of June than there had been on D-Day itself. Field Marshal von Rundstedt personally overruled Rommel's desperate requests to send these divisions to Normandy. He insisted they had to defend against the coming Calais invasion. The deception held so completely that critical German reinforcements never reached the real battle. By the time the Germans realized no second invasion was coming, it was too late. The Allies had broken out of Normandy. Paris was liberated. The German position in France collapsed. Military historians have called Operation Fortitude one of the most successful deceptions in warfare, and Garbo's contribution was paramount. His carefully constructed lies had arguably saved tens of thousands of Allied lives. The soldiers who survived Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Many of them owed their lives to the fact that German panzers sat idle 50 miles away, deceived by a Spanish chicken farmer's imagination. In July 1944, the German High Command awarded Agent Arabelle the Iron Cross, second class on Hitler's personal instructions. This medal was normally reserved for frontline combat soldiers. That they gave it to a civilian spy speaks to how valuable they considered him. The award was presented via radio, since Garbo was supposedly still in England. He expressed humble gratitude, saying he was unworthy of such honor. And in November 1944, King George VI awarded Juan Pujol García, the member of the Order of the British Empire, for his invaluable service to the Allied cause. Juan Pujol García became one of the very few people in history to receive high honors from both sides in World War II. The Germans thought he was their greatest spy. The British knew he was their greatest deceiver, and neither side had any idea just how close the whole operation had come to falling apart, or how many times this ordinary man's extraordinary lies had kept the machinery of deception running. Asterisk, as the war wound down in late 1944, Garbo's usefulness began to fade. The Germans, still unaware they'd been fooled, asked their star agent to investigate the V-1 flying bombs that were striking London. This posed a problem. Any genuine report on V-1 impacts could help the Germans improve their aim. But feeding false information might finally expose Garbo as a fraud. Since the bomb strikes were visible and verifiable, Mi-5 made a decision. It was time for Garbo to exit the stage. In September 1944, they created an arrest scenario. British counterintelligence supposedly caught wind of a suspected spy in London. Garbo sent a final message to his handlers, explaining he had to go silent and into hiding because the authorities were closing in. The Germans, who still trusted him completely, told him to lay low. In early 1945, as Allied armies pushed into Germany and the Third Reich crumbled, they sent Garbo a message. Given the situation, he should cease operations. They never knew the truth. To the end, German intelligence believed Agent Arabelle was a loyal Nazi spy who'd served them brilliantly throughout the war. Asterisk. But for Juan Pujol García, the war's end brought a new kind of danger. If any surviving Nazi loyalists discovered that their prized agent had been a double-crosser, he could become a target for revenge. WWII helped him disappear. In 1949, they even faked his death. Official records showed that Pujol had died of malaria in Angola, Africa. In reality, he'd slipped away to Venezuela in South America. For the next 35 years, Juan Pujol García lived under a new identity, running a small bookstore and gift shop in Caracas. He remarried, had children, built a quiet life far from the shadows and lies of his wartime years. To the world, Garbo was dead. The greatest spy of World War II had vanished into comfortable anonymity, but in the mid-1980s, a British historian named Rupert Allison became fascinated by fragments of information about an agent, codenamed Garbo, who'd played a crucial role in D-Day. Through painstaking research, he tracked down relatives in Spain and got an address in Venezuela. In 1984, Allison made contact. Pujol was shocked. He'd intended to remain forgotten, to pass unnoticed through the rest of his life. But enough time had passed. The Cold War was still on, but World War II was history now. In May 1984, Juan Pujol García, 72 years old, returned to London. When he walked into MI5 headquarters, retired intelligence officers who'd worked with him could barely believe their eyes. One of them blurted out, "It can't be you, you're dead." Prince Philip invited him to Buckingham Palace for a private audience. The old spy who'd once been rejected 3 times by British intelligence was now being honored at the highest levels. But the moment that mattered most came on. June 6, 1984, the 40th anniversary of D-Day. Pujol traveled to Normandy, to the American cemetery overlooking Omaha Beach. Rows upon rows of white crosses stretched across the green fields. 9,000 graves marking American soldiers who'd fallen in the liberation of France. As he walked among those crosses, the weight of what he'd done crashed down on him. These were the men he'd tried to save. These were the graves that might have been doubled or tripled if the deception had failed. According to witnesses, Pujol paused, took in the endless sea of headstones, and fell to his knees sobbing. He felt responsible for each grave, wondering if he could have done more, saved more. Lead better. Word spread among the D-Day veterans attending the anniversary that someone special was present. Gray-haired men, many wearing their old uniforms, began to gather around this elderly Spaniard many had never heard of. One veteran, with tears in his eyes, took Pujol by the arm and turned to his fellow soldiers. "I have the pleasure of introducing Garbo," he said, "the man who saved our lives." The old soldiers applauded. They shook his hand. They thanked him, because many of them, perhaps most of them standing there that day, owed their survival to the fact that German panzers had been in the wrong place on June 6, 1944. Fooled by this man's extraordinary lies, Juan Pujol García, passed away in 1988 in Caracas at age 76. Today, a blue plaque on a London house commemorates where Agent Garbo helped orchestrate the D-Day deception. His story has inspired books and documentaries. He's remembered as the spy who saved D-Day. But perhaps the most important thing to remember about Juan Pujol Garcia is this: he was ordinary. He had no special training, no powerful connections, no advantages. He was just a man who saw evil in the world and decided he had to do something about it. He couldn't join an army. He couldn't fire a weapon. So he weaponized the one thing he had, his imagination, and with nothing but creativity, courage, and an extraordinary gift for deception, he helped bring down the Third Reich. The story of Agent Garbo reminds us that in the darkest times, individual courage can make a decisive difference. One man's determination to fight fascism, combined with his willingness to live a lie for years, changed the course of history. Juan Pujol Garcia proved that you don't need to be a soldier to be a hero. Sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who never fire a shot. Sometimes the most powerful weapons are words, carefully crafted and strategically deployed. His 27 fictional agents never existed, but the lives they saved were very real. The Allied soldiers who came home from Normandy, who survived because German tanks sat idle in the wrong place, they all owe a debt to the master of deception. If you found this story as incredible as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more documented, true stories from history that sound too amazing to be real, but actually happened. Leave a comment and let me know. Would you have had the courage to do what Garbo did? The truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, and sometimes the greatest truths are protected by the most daring lies. Thanks for watching.